The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered ranch house, and Juliet Harper felt her stomach twist with a mixture of hope and dread as she gazed out at the vast Montana territory spread before her like a promise she wasn't sure would be kept. She had written the letter to Graham Sanders 3 months ago, pouring out only half the truth in careful, measured sentences. A widow seeking a fresh start. A woman of good character and strong faith. Someone willing to work hard and build a life on the frontier. What she hadn't mentioned were the 3 small faces now pressed against the dusty window beside her, eyes wide with exhaustion and uncertainty. "Mama, is this it?" 7-year-old Samuel asked, his voice thin with worry. "It is, sweetheart." Juliet smoothed down her travel-worn dress, the only decent one she owned, and adjusted the bonnet that had seen better days. "Remember what we talked about. Best behavior, all of you." 5-year-old Margaret nodded solemnly, clutching the rag doll that had been her constant companion since Philadelphia. 3-year-old Thomas was already asleep against Juliet's side, his thumb in his mouth, blissfully unaware that their entire future hung in the balance of the next few minutes. The driver opened the door, and Montana's April wind rushed in, carrying the scent of sage and distant mountains. Juliet had never been west of Pittsburgh before her husband died. Now here she was, in Twin Falls, Montana territory, in the year of our Lord 1882, about to meet a man who thought he was getting a childless bride. She gathered Thomas into her arms, his small body warm and trusting, and climbed down from the stagecoach. Samuel and Margaret scrambled after her, staying close to her skirts like baby quail sheltering beneath their mother's wings. The ranch house was larger than she had expected, built of solid timber with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Corrals stretched out to the left, holding perhaps a dozen horses. To the right stood a barn, freshly painted red, and beyond that, rolling grassland that seemed to go on forever beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The front door opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. Graham Sanders was tall, taller than Juliet had imagined from his letters, with broad shoulders and hands that looked capable of building anything or breaking anything with equal ease. He wore work-worn trousers and a cotton shirt rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms tanned dark by the sun. His hair was the color of wheat ready for harvest, and his face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors. She guessed him to be around 30, perhaps a few years older, but it was his eyes that held her attention, gray as a winter sky, steady and direct. Those eyes swept over her, then down to the children, and Juliet felt her heart drop into her stomach. This was it. The moment when he would tell her to get back on that stagecoach. The moment when her desperate gamble would fail, and she would have to figure out how to keep 3 children fed and housed with exactly $7.32 to her name. Graham Sanders descended the porch steps slowly, each footfall deliberate. He stopped a few feet away and Juliet forced herself to meet his gaze. "Mr. Sanders," she said, pleased that her voice didn't shake. "I'm Juliet Harper. I should have told you in my letters, but I was afraid you wouldn't. That is, I have children, 3 of them, Samuel, Margaret, and Thomas. I understand this isn't what you expected, and if you want us to leave, we'll manage somehow." The silence stretched out between them like the vast prairie itself. Samuel pressed closer to her leg. Margaret's lower lip trembled. Thomas stirred in her arms, mumbling something about horses. Then Graham Sanders did something Juliet didn't expect. He smiled, a slow smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and transformed his entire face. "Good," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere in his chest. "I've got room for all of you." Juliet's knees nearly gave out with relief. "You do?" Ranch this size needs more than one man to run it proper. Graham crouched down to be at eye level with Samuel. You ever worked with horses, son? Samuel shook his head, but there was a spark of interest in his dark eyes. No, sir. But I'm a fast learner. Mama says so. I bet you are. Graham turned his attention to Margaret. And what about you, little miss? You know anything about chickens? Margaret's eyes widened. You have chickens. About 24 of them, and they need tending every day. Collecting eggs, making sure they have feed and water. Think you could help with that? I think so. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper, but she stood a little straighter. Graham rose to his full height and looked at Thomas, still drowsy in Juliet's arms. And this little fellow? He's only 3, Juliet said quickly. But he's good, truly. He won't be any trouble. I wasn't worried about trouble. Graham's expression softened. I was thinking he looks tuckered out from the journey. Why don't we get all of you inside? I've got stew on the stove, and there's fresh bread from this morning. He turned and headed back toward the house, and Juliet stood frozen for a moment, hardly able to believe what had just happened. The stagecoach driver handed down her trunk, the only piece of luggage they owned, containing everything they had left in the world. Madam, the driver said, you all right? Yes, Juliet breathed. Yes, I think perhaps we are. Inside, the ranch house was spare but clean, with good solid furniture and windows that let in generous amounts of light. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A pot of stew bubbled over the fire, filling the air with the rich scent of meat and vegetables. Bedrooms are upstairs, Graham said, ladling stew into bowls. There's 4 of them. I use the one on the east side. You can have the big one on the west, overlooks the mountains. The 2 smaller rooms would be good for the children, I figure. One for the boys, one for the girl. That's very generous, Juliet managed, settling Thomas into a chair at the rough-hewn table. She hadn't expected separate rooms. She hadn't expected any of this. Graham set bowls in front of each child, then placed one before Juliet. You all must be hungry. It's a long trip from wherever you came from. Philadelphia, Samuel piped up, already spooning stew into his mouth. His eyes widened. This is good. Philadelphia. Graham settled into a chair across from Juliet. That is a long way. What brought you all the way out here? Juliet carefully cut Thomas's meat into smaller pieces while she chose her words. My husband died 2 years ago. Fever took him in 3 days. He was a clerk, and we lived in a boarding house. When he passed, the owner gave me a month to find somewhere else. I took in laundry, did sewing, but it wasn't enough. Not for 4 of us. The children needed more than I could give them there. So you answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride. I did. She met his eyes directly. I know I should have mentioned the children. It was dishonest of me not to. But I was desperate, Mr. Sanders. I know that's no excuse, but it's the truth. Graham was quiet for a moment, studying her across the table. Then he said, I appreciate honesty, and I understand desperation. I came out here with nothing but a horse and a saddle 7 years ago. Worked for other ranchers, saved every penny, and bought this land when the previous owner decided Montana winters were too harsh for his liking. Built most of this house with my own 2 hands. It's beautiful, Juliet said, and meant it. It's been lonely, Graham said simply. I wrote that advertisement because I wanted a family. Doesn't much matter to me if that family comes ready-made or if we build it from the ground up. Either way, there's room here for all of you. Margaret had been listening intently while she ate. Now she asked in her small, serious voice, Are you going to be our new papa? The question hung in the air, innocent and enormous at the same time. Juliet felt heat rise to her cheeks. Margaret, that's not. We shouldn't. But Graham didn't look uncomfortable. He considered the question with the same gravity Margaret had asked it. "Well, that depends. Your mama and I are going to need some time to get to know each other, but I'd be honored to look after you and your brothers, if that's all right with you." Margaret nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and returned to her stew. After the meal, Graham showed them upstairs. The room he had designated for Juliet was indeed spacious, with a real bed frame and mattress, a washstand, and a window that framed the distant mountains in perfect silhouette against the afternoon sky. The children's rooms were smaller but still larger than the single room they had all shared in Philadelphia. "I'll bring up your trunk," Graham said. "There's water in the pitcher and clean linens in the chest at the foot of the bed. Take your time settling in. I've got some work to finish in the barn, but I'll be back before supper." When he was gone, Juliet sank onto the edge of the bed and let out a long, shaky breath. Samuel appeared in the doorway, his expression troubled. "Mama, are we really staying here?" "It seems we are, sweetheart." "And Mr. Sanders doesn't mind about us." Juliet held out her arm and Samuel came to sit beside her. Margaret climbed up on her other side, and Thomas, already rubbing his eyes, curled up in her lap. "Mr. Sanders says he doesn't mind," Juliet said carefully. "But we need to be respectful and helpful. This is his home and he's being very kind to let us stay." "I like it here," Margaret announced. "It's big and there's chickens." "I like the horses," Samuel added. "Do you think he'll really teach me about them?" "If he said he would, then I imagine he will." Juliet kissed the top of each head within reach. "Now, let's get you all cleaned up and rested. We want to make a good impression." That evening, after the children were washed and settled in their new rooms, Juliet came downstairs to find Graham at the kitchen table, working on what appeared to be a harness repair. He looked up when she descended and set down his tools. "They all right?" Asleep before their heads hit the pillows. Juliet crossed to the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. "Mr. Sanders, I want to thank you again for your kindness. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Call me Graham, please. And like I said, it's fine." He joined her at the window, standing a respectful distance away. "Truth is, I've been thinking about this all afternoon, and I reckon it might work out better this way." "How so?" "Well, you and I are strangers. We've exchanged a few letters, but we don't really know each other. If we tried to jump straight into being married, it might be awkward as all hell, pardon my language." Despite herself, Juliet smiled. "I've heard worse." "I figured. City living and all." Graham's tone was dry but not unkind. "What I'm thinking is we take our time. You and the children settle in, get used to the place. We get to know each other proper-like, and when we're both ready, if we're both ready, we can talk about making things official." Relief washed through Juliet. She had been dreading the wedding night, the intimacy with a stranger, the awkwardness of it all. "That sounds very reasonable. In the meantime, you're welcome to stay here as my guest. Help out around the place if you want, but no pressure. The children can start learning ranch work if they're interested, and we can just see how things go." "I would like to help," Juliet said firmly. "I'm not afraid of hard work, and I won't take charity." Graham's gray eyes studied her in the fading light. "You've got pride, I respect that." "All right then. There's plenty to do around here. Cooking, cleaning, garden needs planting, chickens need tending, laundry, mending. I've been managing on my own, but I won't lie and say I haven't let some things slide. Then we have an arrangement." Juliet held out her hand, the way she had seen businessmen do in Philadelphia. Graham looked surprised, then pleased. His hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused and strong. "We have an arrangement." That first night in the big bed in the west room, Juliet lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The wind whispered through the eaves. And downstairs, she could hear the quiet sounds of Graham moving around, banking the fire, checking the doors. For the first time in 2 years, since Daniel had died and left her alone with 3 children and a mountain of fear, Juliet felt something that might have been hope. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and comfortable at the same time. Juliet woke early, as she always had, and found that Graham woke even earlier. By the time she came downstairs, he had already been out to tend the horses and was usually starting coffee on the stove. They would prepare breakfast together in companionable silence, then wake the children. After the meal, Graham would head out to work the ranch, and Juliet would begin tackling the housework that had been neglected for too long. The house needed a woman's touch. There was no denying it. The windows were filthy, the floors needed a good scrubbing, and the curtains were so thick with dust that Juliet took them all down and washed them in the big tub out back. She found spider webs in corners, mouse droppings in the pantry, and enough dirt tracked across the floors to plant a garden. But she also found good bones beneath the grime. The house was solidly built, with craftsmanship that spoke of care and attention to detail. Graham had built shelves that were level and true, had fitted windows that kept out the drafts, had constructed a chimney that drew smoke perfectly. Margaret took to the chickens immediately, delighting in the daily egg hunt and scattering feed with serious concentration. Samuel followed Graham around like a shadow whenever possible, asking endless questions about horses and cattle and ranch work. Graham answered every question with patience, showing Samuel how to curry a horse, how to check hooves for stones, how to recognize when an animal was sick or injured. Thomas was too small for real chores, but he liked to help Juliet with everything, standing on a stool to wash vegetables or carefully arranging kindling for the fire. He had started calling Graham Mr. Graham, which seemed to please the rancher immensely. 2 weeks after their arrival, Juliet was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard a commotion from the barn. She dropped the wet sheet back in the basket and hurried toward the sound, her heart pounding. She found Samuel standing frozen in one of the stalls, facing a large bay mare who had her ears pinned back and was showing the whites of her eyes. The horse shifted her weight, and Samuel whimpered, "Don't move, son." Graham's voice was calm but firm. He appeared from the other side of the stall, moving slowly and deliberately. "Juliet, stay back. This is Rosie. She's usually gentle, but she's protective of her space when she's nervous." Juliet's hands clenched in her skirts, but she stayed where she was, watching as Graham approached the mare, speaking in a low, soothing voice. "Easy, girl. Easy now. Nobody's going to hurt you. That's just a boy curious is all. No harm meant." The mare's ears twitched, listening. Graham kept up his steady stream of quiet words, moving closer until he could lay a hand on her neck. She settled under his touch, the tension leaving her body. "All right, Samuel," Graham said, still in that calm voice. "Walk toward me, slow and easy, no sudden moves." Samuel obeyed, his face pale but determined. When he was close enough, Graham lifted him clear over the stall door and set him down safely on the other side. Only then did Juliet rush forward, pulling Samuel into her arms. "Are you all right? What happened?" "I'm sorry, Mama. I just wanted to see the horses up close. I didn't mean to scare her." "He didn't do anything wrong," Graham said, giving Rosie a final pat before exiting the stall himself. "Rosie's been skittish since a mountain lion spooked the herd last month. It's my fault for not warning him to stay clear of her for now." "A mountain lion," Juliet's voice came out higher than she intended. "It's handled. Shot it myself a few weeks back, but Rosie remembers." Graham crouched down to Samuel's level. "You've got good instincts staying still like that. Shows you're learning." But from now on, you don't go into any stall without me there, understand? Even the gentle horses can be unpredictable." Samuel nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir, I promise." That night, after the children were in bed, Juliet found Graham on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. She brought 2 cups of coffee and offered him one. "Thank you for this afternoon," she said. "With Samuel, he's a brave kid. Didn't panic, which is more than a lot of grown men would do. He adores you." The words came out before Juliet could stop them. "All of them do. You're good with children." Graham was quiet for a moment, then said, "I was the oldest of 6. Helped raise my younger brothers and sisters after Ma died. That was back in Kansas before the war. You fought, I did. Union side. Saw things I'd rather forget." He took a sip of coffee. "When it was over, I couldn't go back to Kansas. Too many memories. So I came west, kept moving until I found a place that felt like I could breathe again. Montana Territory. Montana Territory." He gestured at the vast darkness before them. "Out here, a man can build something new, leave the past behind and just start over." Juliet understood that more than he knew. "Is that why you never married before? Before the advertisement, I mean." "Partly. Also, there aren't many women out here, and the ones that are here are already spoken for. I thought about finding a wife in one of the bigger towns, but I'm not much for city life anymore." He glanced at her. "What about you? Your letters said your husband died, but you didn't say much else." "There isn't much to say." Juliet wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Daniel was a good man. Quiet, steady. We married when I was 18 and Samuel came along a year later. Daniel worked as a clerk in a shipping office. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable enough. Then Margaret came and then Thomas, and we were happy. But—" she should have known he would hear the unspoken qualification. "But Daniel was never very strong. He caught sick easily, tired easily. When the fever came, he didn't have the strength to fight it. And then he was gone, and I had 3 children and no income and no family to turn to. Your parents, dead, both of them years ago. Daniel's parents wanted nothing to do with me after he died. They said I should have taken better care of him." The old hurt still stung. "As if I could have prevented a fever." Graham's voice was gentle when he spoke. "Some people need someone to blame when things go wrong. Makes them feel like they have control over a world that doesn't make much sense, I suppose." Juliet took a breath, letting the cool Montana air fill her lungs. "In any case, I tried to make it work in Philadelphia. But the city is expensive and jobs for women with children are scarce. I was about to be evicted when I saw your advertisement in the newspaper. It seemed like a sign. Maybe it was." Graham set down his coffee cup. "I'm glad you answered it. Even if you did fail to mention a few important details." There was humor in his voice, and Juliet found herself smiling. "I am sorry about that. Don't be. Like I said, it's working out fine." He stood, stretching. "I should get some sleep. Got to ride out to the north pasture tomorrow, check on the herd. Would you and the children like to come along? It's a beautiful ride, and Samuel might enjoy seeing more of the ranch. I think he would love that." Juliet stood as well. "Thank you, Graham, for everything." He looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable in the starlight. "You're welcome, Juliet. Sleep well." The ride to the north pasture was everything Graham had promised. The children were thrilled to ride horses for the first time, with Samuel perched in front of Graham on his big gelding and Margaret riding with Juliet on a gentle mare named Daisy. Thomas rode in a sling on Juliet's back, chattering happily about everything he saw. The ranch was even larger than Juliet had realized, stretching for what seemed like miles in every direction. Graham pointed out landmarks, told stories about the land, explained how he managed the cattle and horses that were his livelihood. "I've got about 200 head of cattle right now," he said as they crested a hill and looked down on the grazing herd. "It's not a huge operation, but it's growing. In a few years, if all goes well, this could be one of the bigger ranches in the territory." "You've built something impressive," Juliet said honestly. "I've been lucky. Good land, good water, decent weather most years." He helped Samuel down from the horse. "Come on, let's go take a closer look." They spent the afternoon among the cattle, with Graham teaching Samuel how to recognize the different breeds and explaining the markings he used to identify his stock. Margaret chased butterflies through the wildflowers that dotted the grassland. Thomas eventually fell asleep in his sling, lulled by the movement and the warm sun. On the ride back, as the sun was starting to sink toward the western mountains, Juliet found herself watching Graham more than the scenery. He sat his horse with the ease of long practice, completely at home in this vast landscape. When he smiled at something Samuel said, his whole face transformed, becoming younger and somehow more open. He was a good man. She had known that intellectually from his letters and his actions since her arrival, but now she was beginning to feel it, to understand it in her bones. Graham Sanders was a man of his word, a man who could be trusted. And he was handsome in a rough-hewn, weathered way that was nothing like Daniel's soft city features. Heat crept up Juliet's neck at the thought, and she quickly looked away, focusing on the path ahead. She was not ready for those kinds of feelings. It was too soon, too complicated. But the feelings came anyway, whether she was ready or not. A month after Juliet's arrival, the preacher came through Twin Falls. The town was small, barely more than a wide spot in the road with a general store, a saloon, a livery, and a handful of houses. Church services were held in the general store, with Reverend Thomas Morrison making a circuit through the scattered communities every few weeks. Graham suggested they all attend, and Juliet agreed eagerly. She had missed church, missed the sense of community and the comfort of familiar hymns. The service was simple but heartfelt, with about 20 people crowded into the store among the barrels of flour and coils of rope. Juliet was immediately aware of the curious stares directed at her and the children, could practically hear the questions buzzing through the small gathering. After the service, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair approached. "You must be Mrs. Harper. I'm Eleanor Simmons. My husband and I have the ranch just south of Graham's place." "It's nice to meet you," Juliet said, shaking the offered hand. "And these are your children." Eleanor smiled at Samuel, Margaret, and Thomas. "What lovely little ones. You're all settling in at Graham's place?" "We are, thank you." Eleanor's eyes were sharp but not unkind. "I'm sure there's quite a story there. When you're ready to share it, I'd love to have you for tea. It's rare to have another woman nearby, and I could use the company." "I would like that very much." Over the next hour, Juliet met the other residents of Twin Falls and the surrounding ranches. There was Robert Simmons, Eleanor's husband, a gruff man with a booming laugh. The storekeeper, Henry Chen, whose parents had come from China to work on the railroads. Young Dr. Peter Walsh, fresh from medical school in Boston and full of enthusiasm for frontier life. The widow Vera Patterson, who ran the boarding house and had opinions on everything. They were curious about her, certainly, but also welcoming in the straightforward way of people who understood that the frontier demanded cooperation more than judgment. If Graham Sanders said these newcomers were all right, that seemed to be good enough for most of them. On the ride home, Samuel was full of stories about the other children he had met. "There's a boy named Jack who's going to show me how to fish in the creek, and another one named Billy who has a dog that can do tricks." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Juliet felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The children needed friends, needed to be part of a community. "Eleanor Simmons is good people," Graham said. She helped me out a lot when I first came here, brought me food when I was building the house, showed me which plants were safe to eat and which ones to avoid. You could do worse than to have her as a friend. She seemed very kind. Juliet adjusted Thomas on her hip. Everyone did, actually. I was worried they might be less welcoming. Because of the circumstances, Graham shook his head. Out here, people care less about convention and more about character. You're working hard, taking care of your children, being respectful. That's what matters. That night, after the children were asleep, Juliet took extra care with her appearance before coming downstairs. She had washed her hair in rainwater, braided it carefully, and put on the dress she had been saving, the blue one that Daniel had always said brought out her eyes. Graham looked up from the account book he was working on when she entered, and something flickered in his gray eyes. "You look nice." "Thank you." Juliet felt suddenly self-conscious. "I thought since we've been here a month maybe we could talk about how things are going." "Sure." Graham closed the book and gave her his full attention. "How are things going from your perspective?" Juliet settled into the chair across from him. "The children are happy, happier than I've seen them in a long time. Samuel talks about nothing but horses and cattle. Margaret has named every single chicken. Even Thomas is thriving out here. And you, I'm..." She paused, searching for the right words. "I'm content. The work is hard, but it's good work, meaningful, and it's beautiful here. I never imagined anywhere could be this beautiful. It grows on you." Graham leaned back in his chair. "I've been thinking, if you're planning to stay, we should probably make things official. Not the marriage, not yet, but at least go see the magistrate in Helena. Draw up some papers that give you legal standing as my intended. That way, if anything happened to me, you and the children would have claim to this place." Juliet's chest tightened. "Nothing's going to happen to you. Probably not. But this is the frontier, Juliet. Men die out here from stupid accidents all the time. Thrown from a horse, bitten by a snake, caught in a blizzard. I want to make sure you're protected." "That's very thoughtful." She studied his face, trying to read the emotions there. "But what about you? If we make this legal arrangement, you're committing to us. To me and 3 children who aren't yours. That's a lot to take on." Graham met her gaze steadily. "I'm not afraid of commitment, and those kids, they're good kids. Smart, hardworking, respectful. I'd be proud to call them mine." Something in Juliet's chest cracked open just a little. "And me." "You," Graham's voice softened. "You're one of the strongest women I've ever met. Coming all the way out here with 3 children, not knowing what you'd find, risking everything on a letter from a stranger. That takes courage, or desperation. Courage and desperation often look the same." He stood and crossed to the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape. "I won't rush you, Juliet. I meant what I said about taking time to get to know each other. But I want you to know that I'm in this. For the long haul, if you'll have me." Juliet rose and joined him at the window. She could see their reflections in the glass, 2 figures standing close but not quite touching. I think I'd like to go to Helena, make things official, not marriage yet but the legal papers, so we both know where we stand." Graham turned to face her, and they were suddenly very close. Juliet could see the laugh lines around his eyes, the small scar on his left cheek, the way his pulse beat in his throat. "Where do we stand, Juliet?" Her breath caught. I think we stand together." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. "I think so too." They stood like that for a long moment, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Thomas called out from upstairs, having a nightmare, and the spell broke. Juliet hurried up to comfort him, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with maternal concern. The trip to Helena took 3 days, riding in the wagon with all 3 children and enough supplies for the journey. Graham knew a family along the way who let them stay the night, and they camped one night under the stars, the children delighted by the adventure of sleeping in bedrolls around a campfire. Helena was a revelation to Juliet, bustling and modern in a way Twin Falls certainly wasn't. The territorial capital had brick buildings, paved streets, even electric lights in some of the fancier establishments. They found lodging at a respectable hotel, with Graham taking one room and Juliet and the children sharing another. The next morning, they met with a lawyer named Mr. Gerald Peterson, who drew up the papers declaring Juliet as Graham's intended bride and establishing her rights to his property in the event of his death or incapacitation. Graham also drew up a will, leaving everything to Juliet and the children. "This is quite generous, Mr. Sanders," the lawyer said, reviewing the documents. "You're essentially making this woman and her children your heirs, with no legal obligation on her part to actually marry you." "That's right," Graham said calmly, "and if she changes her mind, decides to leave, then she leaves. I'm not interested in trapping anyone into staying with me." Graham glanced at Juliet. "This is about making sure they're protected, not about controlling them." Mr. Peterson shook his head but prepared the documents anyway. They were signed and notarized, and Juliet walked out of the office feeling both relieved and overwhelmed. Graham had just given her security, real security, for the first time since Daniel's death. "Thank you," she said as they walked back toward the hotel. The children had stayed there with the proprietor's teenage daughter, who was delighted to earn some extra money watching them. "You don't have to keep thanking me." "Yes, I do. You've given us everything, Graham. A home, security, kindness. I don't know how to repay that." He stopped walking and turned to face her, right there on the busy Helena Street. "You repay it by being happy, by letting those kids grow up safe and loved, by building a life with me if that's what you want. That's all I need, Juliet." Impulsively, she reached out and took his hand. He looked surprised but pleased, his fingers curling around hers. They stood like that for a moment, hand in hand on the sidewalk while Helena bustled around them. "I do want that," Juliet said softly. "I want to build a life with you." Graham's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good. That's real good." That evening, after the children were asleep in the hotel room, Graham knocked softly on the door. Juliet opened it to find him freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. "I thought, since we're in Helena anyway, maybe you'd like to have dinner with me. Downstairs in the restaurant, just the two of us." It was the first time he had asked her on what could only be called a proper courtship outing. Juliet's heart fluttered. "I'd like that very much. Just let me check on the children." All three were sleeping soundly, and the proprietor's daughter assured Juliet she would stay right outside the door until they returned. Juliet smoothed down her blue dress, the same one she had worn that night in the ranch house, and took Graham's offered arm. The hotel restaurant was modest by city standards but elegant for frontier Montana. They sat at a table by the window, watching the evening foot traffic while they ate roasted chicken and potatoes and fresh vegetables that were a luxury in Twin Falls. "This is nice," Juliet said. "Civilized." "Makes you miss Philadelphia?" She considered the question honestly. "No, I thought it might, but it doesn't. Philadelphia was crowded and dirty and full of people who didn't care if you lived or died. This is better. Even Twin Falls, small as it is, feels more like home than Philadelphia ever did." "I'm glad." Graham cut into his chicken. "I was worried you might get here and realize you'd made a mistake, coming all this way to a place with no theater, no shops, no society. I don't need those things. I need safety for my children. I need honest work and clean air and—" She trailed off, suddenly shy. "And what? And someone I can trust, someone good." She met his eyes. "I need you, Graham. We need you." His hand found hers across the table and he held it gently. "You have me for as long as you want me." After dinner, they walked through Helena's streets as the sun set and the electric lights began to glow. Graham pointed out sights, told her about the territorial government, explained the politics of Montana's push for statehood. Juliet listened and asked questions, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of adult conversation with a man who respected her intelligence. When they returned to the hotel, Graham walked her to her door. They stood in the hallway, and Juliet was acutely aware of how close he was, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his gray eyes had darkened in the dim light. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "It was perfect. We should do it more often. Maybe not in Helena, but I could take you to dinner in Twin Falls. Such as it is, I'd like that." Graham reached up slowly and cupped her face with one calloused hand. "Juliet, I'd very much like to kiss you. May I?" Her breath caught. No one had ever asked permission like that, so respectfully, giving her the choice. "Yes, please." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and pressed his lips to hers. It was a gentle kiss, almost chaste, but it sent warmth flooding through Juliet's entire body. His lips were soft despite the rough stubble around them, and he tasted like coffee and possibility. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. "Was that all right?" "It was more than all right." Juliet's voice came out breathless. "It was wonderful." Graham smiled, that slow smile that transformed his face. "Good. That's real good." He stepped back, putting proper distance between them. "Sleep well, Juliet." "You too, Graham." She slipped into the room and leaned against the closed door, her hand pressed to her still tingling lips. It had been so long since anyone had kissed her, since anyone had looked at her with desire tempered by respect and tenderness. She was falling in love with Graham Sanders. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it felt right. Natural, like the most sensible thing in the world. The journey back to the ranch felt shorter somehow, even though they took the same route. Juliet found herself stealing glances at Graham as he drove the wagon, noticing things she hadn't before. The way his hands were gentle but sure on the reins. The patient way he answered Samuel's endless questions. The soft look in his eyes when he checked on Thomas sleeping in the wagon bed. By the time they reached the ranch, summer was beginning to assert itself in earnest. The days grew longer and warmer, and the ranch demanded constant attention. Graham was up before dawn and often didn't return until after sunset, working to maintain the property and tend the growing herd. Juliet threw herself into the work of the household with renewed energy. She planted a garden behind the house, putting in vegetables and herbs that would see them through the winter. She improved the chicken coop, making it more secure against predators. She sewed curtains and mended clothes and preserved food and turned the ranch house into a home. Eleanor Simmons made good on her invitation to tea, riding over one afternoon with a basket of fresh baked biscuits. The two women sat on the porch while the children played in the yard, and Juliet found herself relaxing in Eleanor's easygoing company. "I'll admit, we were all curious when Graham put that advertisement in the paper," Eleanor said, pouring tea into chipped china cups. "Some of the ladies thought he was being too forward, but I told them a man has a right to seek a wife however he sees fit." "It must have caused quite a stir when I showed up with 3 children." Eleanor laughed. "Oh, there was some talk, but good-natured mostly. Graham shut down the few who were being uncharitable, told them his business was his own and they could mind theirs. He did. He's protective of you. Anyone with eyes can see that." Eleanor studied Juliet over her teacup. "The question is, are you falling for him too, or is this just an arrangement of convenience?" Juliet felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We're taking our time, getting to know each other." "That's wise." "But that's not what I asked." There was something about Aliner's kind, knowing eyes that made Juliet want to be honest. I'm falling for him. I didn't mean to, didn't think I was ready to feel that way about anyone again. But Graham is. He's everything I didn't know I needed. Aliner smiled. Good. That man deserves happiness. He's been alone too long, working himself to the bone on this ranch with no one to share it with. You and those children, you're the best thing that could have happened to him. I hope so. Juliet watched Margaret chasing a butterfly, her laughter bright and clear. He's certainly the best thing that's happened to us. As summer deepened, Juliet and Graham fell into a pattern of courting that was both old-fashioned and perfectly suited to their circumstances. They would sit on the porch after the children were in bed, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Graham would read to her from books he had collected over the years, his deep voice bringing the words to life. Juliet would sing while she worked, and Graham would stop whatever he was doing just to listen. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow, and she baked his favorite foods. He taught her to ride better, patiently correcting her posture and showing her how to communicate with the horse through subtle shifts of weight. She mended his clothes with careful stitches and added small touches of embroidery, making the practical beautiful. They kissed sometimes, sweet stolen moments when the children weren't looking, and each kiss felt like a promise. In early July, a summer storm rolled through, violent and sudden. Rain lashed the windows and thunder shook the house. Thomas woke crying, terrified by the noise, and Margaret wasn't far behind. Juliet gathered them both in her arms, trying to soothe them, but the storm was fierce. Then Graham was there, having heard the commotion from his room. He scooped up Thomas, and the little boy immediately buried his face in Graham's shoulder. "It's all right, buddy. It's just noise. The house is strong. We're all safe." "Promise?" Thomas's voice was muffled. "I promise." Graham carried him to the window. "Look, see that lightning?" "That's just electricity in the sky. It looks scary, but it can't hurt you in here." Margaret joined them at the window, still holding Juliet's hand. "Why is it so loud?" "That's the thunder. It's the sound of the lightning heating up the air real fast. The bigger the boom, the farther away it is." Graham pointed. "See, you count between the flash and the sound. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That means it's about a mile away." The scientific explanation seemed to calm the children more than any amount of reassurance. They watched the storm with Graham, counting the seconds, learning instead of fearing. Eventually, the worst of it passed, and the rain settled into a steady patter. Graham carried Thomas back to bed, tucking him in with gentle efficiency. "You're brave, you know that, both of you. Lots of kids would have been a lot more scared than you were. We have you here," Margaret said simply, "so we don't have to be scared." Juliet saw the emotion flash across Graham's face, saw him swallow hard. "Well, I'll always be here when you need me. You can count on that." After the children were settled, Graham and Juliet stood in the hallway between their rooms. The storm had passed, leaving behind the clean smell of rain and the steady drip of water from the eaves. "You're good with them," Juliet said softly. "You're so patient, so kind. They love you, Graham." "I love them too." He said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "They're good kids. I meant what I told Margaret. I'll always be here for them, for all of you." Juliet stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I know. That's why I love you." The words hung in the air, enormous and irrevocable. Graham's eyes widened, and then he was cupping her face in both hands, looking at her like she was the most precious thing he had ever seen. "Say that again." "I love you, Graham Sanders. I think I've been falling in love with you since the day we arrived, when you looked at my children and said you had room for all of us." He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of all the emotion he usually kept carefully controlled. Juliet melted into him, her hands gripping his shoulders, her heart soaring. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Graham rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too, Juliet Harper. I have from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, looking scared and brave and beautiful all at once." "Beautiful," Juliet laughed shakily. "I was covered in trail dust. You were beautiful." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Marry me, for real this time, not just on paper. Be my wife, let me be your husband, let those kids be ours together." "Yes." Juliet didn't even have to think about it. "Yes, I'll marry you." Graham kissed her again and then again until Juliet was dizzy with happiness. When they finally parted, reluctantly, to go to their separate rooms, she felt like she was floating. They were married 3 weeks later, on a Sunday after church services, with Reverend Morrison officiating and half the population of Twin Falls in attendance. Juliet wore a dress that a leaner had helped her make from fabric Graham had bought in Helena, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Samuel served as best man, standing so straight and proud that Juliet's eyes filled with tears. Margaret was the flower girl, scattering petals from the garden with solemn concentration. Thomas dozed in Alina's arms, having exhausted himself playing with the other children before the ceremony. Graham wore his Sunday best, and when Juliet walked toward him through the small crowd, his face lit up with such joy that she had to blink back tears. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and honor and cherish each other for all their days. Graham slipped a simple gold band onto Juliet's finger, and she did the same for him, the metal warm against his calloused skin. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Morrison declared with a broad smile. "Graham, you may kiss your bride." And he did thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. When they broke apart, Juliet was blushing, but she was also happier than she had ever been in her life. The reception was held at the ranch, with everyone bringing food to share. Tables were set up in the yard, and someone produced a fiddle. There was dancing and laughter and more food than Juliet had seen in one place since before Daniel died. Alina pulled her aside at one point, embracing her warmly. "Welcome to the family, dear. I'm so happy for you both. Thank you for everything, for being my friend when I desperately needed one. That's what neighbors are for out here. We look after each other." Alina glanced over at Graham, who was showing a group of children how to rope a fence post. "He's a good man. Make each other happy. We will." As the sun set and the party began to wind down, guests started heading home. The Simmons helped clean up, insisting that the bride and groom shouldn't have to work on their wedding day. Finally, they too departed, leaving the newly married couple alone with the 3 sleepy children. Juliet got the kids ready for bed while Graham banked the fires and checked the doors. By the time she came downstairs, he was waiting by the stairs, looking both hopeful and uncertain. "I was thinking," he said, "if you'd like, we could move your things into my room, our room. But if you want more time, that's all right too. I don't want to rush you." Juliet crossed to him and took his hands. "I don't want more time. I want to be your wife in every sense of the word." The look in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He led her upstairs to the east room, the room that had been his alone but would now be theirs together. It was neat and spare, with a large bed and a window that faced the rising sun. Graham had put fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers on the dresser. He kissed her slowly, reverently, his hands trembling slightly as they found the buttons of her dress. Juliet had been nervous about this moment, had worried it might feel wrong or too soon or like a betrayal of Daniel's memory, but it didn't feel like any of those things. It felt right and natural and like coming home after a long journey. Graham was patient and gentle, attentive to her needs and her comfort. He made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, whispering words of love and devotion against her skin. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Juliet's head on Graham's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy," he murmured. "I thought I'd spend my life alone on this ranch, working until I dropped. But then you came along and changed everything." "We changed everything," Juliet corrected, tilting her head to look at him. "You gave us a home when we had nowhere else to go. You gave us hope and security and love. We're the lucky ones, Graham. I think we're all lucky." He kissed the top of her head. "We found each other." The summer passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. The children thrived, growing brown and strong in the Montana sun. Samuel was becoming quite proficient with the horses, and Graham had started teaching him to rope. Margaret's chicken operation was impressively organized, and she had even started selling eggs to neighbors. Thomas followed Graham everywhere, chattering constantly, calling him Papa with unself-conscious ease. Juliet had never worked so hard in her life, but she had also never been happier. She woke each morning to Graham's kiss and fell asleep each night in his arms. The ranch house had become a real home, filled with the sounds of children playing and adults laughing and life being lived fully. In September, Juliet realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she dismissed it as stress or the change in altitude or any number of other reasons. But when another month passed and her breasts grew tender, and she found herself exhausted by mid-afternoon, she knew. She was pregnant with Graham's child. The realization filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Joy because this baby would be a product of their love, a new life born from the family they had built together. Terror because childbirth was dangerous, and she had 3 children who needed her, and what if something went wrong? She waited until the children were in bed before telling Graham. He was in the barn, tending to one of the horses who had developed a slight limp. Juliet found him in the lantern light, his hands gentle on the animal's leg. "Graham, I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, hearing the seriousness in her tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least I hope not. I'm going to have a baby, our baby." For a moment Graham just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming into a grin that was pure joy. "A baby." He crossed to her in 3 strides, picking her up and spinning her around. "Juliet, that's wonderful. That's the best news I've ever heard. You're happy." Relief flooded through her. "Happy?" "I'm beyond happy." He set her down carefully, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach. "Our baby. A piece of you and me together. God, Juliet, I can't even put into words how this makes me feel." She leaned into him, letting his strength support her. "I was worried you might think it was too soon or that with 3 children already. I could never think that. This baby is a blessing. They're all blessings." Graham tilted her face up to his. "How are you feeling? Are you all right? Do we need to get the doctor?" "I'm fine. Tired, but fine. It's early still, only about 2 months along. The baby should come in April or May." "April or May." Graham's eyes were distant, calculating. "Spring. That's good. The weather will be mild, and I can make sure I'm around more to help with the children while you're recovering." Over the next months, as Juliet's belly grew round with their child, Graham was more attentive than ever. He insisted she rest more, take on less of the heavy work. He hired a woman from town to help with the laundry and some of the cooking. He fussed over her until Juliet had to laugh and remind him that pregnancy was natural, not an illness. The children were excited about the baby, though each in their own way. Samuel, now 8, was hoping for a brother. "Sisters are all right," he said diplomatically, glancing at Margaret, "but it would be fun to have another boy around." Margaret wanted a sister, naturally, but said she would love a brother too if that's what God decided to send them. Thomas, at 4, was mostly confused about where the baby was and why Mama's tummy was getting so big. Graham patiently explained it to him multiple times, using simple words and gentle humor. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in October. Juliet watched the landscape transform into a wonderland of white, the mountains sharp and clear against the blue sky. She had been nervous about her first Montana winter, but the house was solid and warm, and they had laid in plenty of supplies. They spent the long winter evenings as a family, gathered around the fire. Graham read aloud while Juliet sewed tiny clothes for the baby. The children played quiet games or worked on the lessons Juliet taught them each day, determined that they would know their letters and numbers and history. On Christmas morning, there were simple presents for everyone. Graham had carved wooden toys for the children and made Juliet a beautiful jewelry box from dark wood he had been secretly working on for months. Juliet had knitted Graham warm socks and a scarf, and had somehow found time to make each child a new set of clothes. It was a perfect day, cozy and warm and full of love. As Juliet watched Graham playing on the floor with the children, their laughter filling the house, she felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. Spring came slowly, the snow reluctant to release its grip on the land. But by April, the wildflowers were beginning to bloom, and Juliet's belly was enormous. Dr. Walsh rode out to the ranch weekly, checking on her progress and assuring Graham that everything looked normal. "First babies can be unpredictable," the doctor said, "but she's healthy and strong. I don't foresee any problems." Juliet hoped he was right. She had given birth 3 times before, but that didn't make the prospect any less daunting. Each labor was different, each birth carried risks. On a warm night in late April, Juliet woke to the familiar sensation of contractions beginning. She lay still for a few minutes, timing them, making sure this was real labor and not false pains. When she was certain, she gently shook Graham awake. "It's time," she whispered. Graham was instantly alert, years of ranching having trained him to wake quickly and completely. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Will you send Samuel to fetch Dr. Walsh and Alina if you can? I'd like to have another woman here." "Of course." Graham helped her sit up, his hands gentle but shaking slightly. "How far apart are the pains?" "About 10 minutes. We have time." Graham woke Samuel, who took off on his pony toward the Simmons ranch without hesitation, mature and responsible beyond his 8 years. Then Graham helped Juliet downstairs, made her tea, held her hand through the contractions, and generally looked terrified. Alina arrived first, breezing in with her calm, competent manner. "All right, my dear, let's get you comfortable. Graham, boil water and make yourself useful elsewhere." Dr. Walsh arrived an hour later, by which time Juliet's contractions were 5 minutes apart and intensifying. He examined her and pronounced everything progressing normally. "It could be a few hours yet," he said. "First babies born in a new marriage sometimes take their time, but this baby had other ideas." 2 hours later, as the sun was rising over the mountains, Juliet gave one final push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her newborn baby's cry. "It's a boy," Dr. Walsh announced, laying the squalling infant on Juliet's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Juliet looked down at her son, at his red face and waving fists and absolute perfection, and felt tears stream down her face. He had Graham's eyes already, that same gray color, and a shock of dark hair. "Graham," she called, and her husband was there instantly, having been pacing anxiously in the hallway despite Alina's earlier banishment. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the baby in awe. "Is that your son?" Juliet said. "Our son." Graham approached slowly, reverently, as if afraid he might break the spell. He looked down at the baby, and Juliet saw tears in his eyes. "He's perfect," Graham whispered. "Absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Graham's hands were gentle as he took the baby, cradling him with surprising confidence. "Hello there, little man. I'm your papa. I've been waiting to meet you for a long time." The baby stopped crying, seemingly fascinated by this new voice. His tiny hand curled around Graham's finger, and Graham made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "What should we name him?" Graham asked, not taking his eyes off his son. Juliet had been thinking about this for months. "I thought we could name him after your father." "You said his name was William." Graham looked at her, emotion raw on his face. "You do that, of course. He was your father. He should be honored." "William Sanders." Graham tested the name. "Billy for short. I like it a lot." Over the next weeks, the household adjusted to having a newborn. Billy was a relatively easy baby, sleeping well and nursing without difficulty. The other children were fascinated by him, each wanting to hold him and help care for him. Samuel was protective, making sure everyone washed their hands before touching the baby and telling people to be quiet when Billy was sleeping. Margaret sang to him constantly, soft lullabies that seemed to soothe him when he fussed. Thomas was confused about why the baby couldn't play yet, but he liked bringing Billy toys and showing them to him with great enthusiasm. Graham was a devoted father, getting up in the night to change Billy so Juliet could rest, holding him for hours when he was fussy, talking to him about the ranch and the horses, and everything they would do together when Billy was older. "You're a natural," Juliet said one evening, watching Graham rock Billy to sleep. "I told you I helped raise my siblings. I know my way around a baby." He glanced at her. "But it's different when it's your own. When it's a child you made with the woman you love, everything feels more significant." "I know what you mean." Juliet moved to stand beside him, looking down at their sleeping son. "I love all my children equally, but Billy represents something new, hope, a fresh start, everything good we've built together." "He's not more important than the others," Graham said quickly. "Of course not. But he's symbolic. He's proof that we did the right thing, taking this chance on each other." Graham's arm came around her waist, pulling her close. "Best decision I ever made, answering that knock on the door and finding you and 3 kids on my doorstep. Best decision I ever made, getting on that stagecoach." They stood like that together, watching their son sleep, while outside the Montana night settled soft and quiet over the land. The seasons turned again, and life on the ranch continued in its rhythms. Billy grew from infant to toddler, following his siblings everywhere on chubby, unsteady legs. Samuel turned 9, then 10, becoming more skilled with the horses and cattle every day. Margaret declared she wanted to be a teacher when she grew up, and spent hours practicing her letters and reading everything she could get her hands on. Thomas started helping Graham with the easier ranch work, proud to be given real responsibilities. Juliet had never been happier. The work was still hard, the winters still harsh, the isolation still challenging at times. But she had Graham, and she had her children, and she had a home that was truly theirs. 2 years after Billy's birth, Juliet found herself pregnant again. This time, the news was met with excitement rather than anxiety. They knew what to expect now, knew that they could handle whatever came. Their daughter, Caroline, was born on a snowy December night, arriving just before Christmas like a gift. She had Juliet's dark hair and features, but she had inherited Graham's calm temperament and steady disposition. "Now we're even," Graham joked, holding Caroline while Billy climbed onto the bed to inspect his new sister. 3 kids from before and 2 from us. A perfect blend of our lives together. Are you suggesting we stop at 5? Juliet asked, amused. I'm suggesting nothing. If God sees fit to bless us with more children, I'll welcome them gladly, but I'm also perfectly content with what we have. As it turned out, Caroline was their last child. Juliet didn't conceive again, and while there was a small pang of loss, she found she was satisfied with their family of 7. They had enough love to go around, enough resources to care for everyone, and enough chaos to keep life interesting. The children grew, each finding their place in the family and on the ranch. Samuel showed such promise with the horses that Graham started teaching him the finer points of breeding and training. By the time he was 15, people were coming from other ranches to buy horses that Samuel had helped train. Margaret did become a teacher, after a fashion. The community built a small schoolhouse, and Margaret, at 16, was hired to teach the younger children their lessons. She lived at home and rode to school each day, proud of her independence and her contribution. Thomas surprised everyone by showing a talent for carpentry. He could look at a broken piece of equipment and figure out how to fix it, could build things from scratch with minimal instruction. Graham started taking him along when neighbors needed repairs, and Thomas's reputation grew. Billy, as he got older, showed his father's gift for reading the land and understanding cattle. He had an instinct for knowing where to graze the herd, when to move them, how to spot sickness before it spread. Graham said Billy would run the ranch someday, and Billy beamed with pride. Caroline was the baby, doted on by everyone, but she refused to be spoiled. She had a fierce independence and a sharp mind, asking questions about everything and accepting nothing at face value. At 6, she announced she was going to be a doctor like Dr. Walsh, and no one doubted she would achieve it. The ranch prospered over the years. Graham's herd grew to over 500 head of cattle, making them one of the larger operations in the region. They added on to the house, building more bedrooms and a proper parlor. Graham hired on help during the busy seasons, giving Samuel and Thomas more opportunities to learn management alongside the physical work. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, and Twin Falls grew along with it. More families moved to the area, the town got a real church building, and the railroad came through, making it easier to get goods to market. Through it all, Juliet and Graham's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, of course. Graham could be stubborn, and Juliet had a temper when provoked. But they had learned to talk through their problems, to compromise, to remember that they were on the same side. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Graham took Juliet back to Helena, just the 2 of them, leaving the children in Eleanor's capable care. They stayed in the same hotel, ate at the same restaurant, walked the same streets they had walked when they were still uncertain about their future together. "Do you remember being here before?" Graham asked as they strolled through the summer evening. "You were so nervous." "I was terrified," Juliet corrected. "I thought I was falling in love with you, but I wasn't sure if it was real or just gratitude for your kindness. And now I know it's real, the realest thing in my life." She squeezed his hand. "I love you more today than I did 10 years ago, and I'll love you more 10 years from now than I do today." Graham stopped walking and pulled her into his arms, right there on the Helena sidewalk, not caring who saw. "I love you, Juliet Sanders. You and those kids, you saved my life. I didn't even know I was drowning until you threw me a rope." "We saved each other," Juliet whispered against his chest. "That's how it works." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other, while the world moved around them. Then Graham tilted her face up and kissed her, deep and long and full of 10 years of love and commitment and shared life. When they returned to the ranch, They found the children had decorated the house with wildflowers and streamers, and Alina had helped them bake a lopsided but enthusiastic cake. The family celebrated together, laughing and talking and sharing stories late into the night. As Juliet got ready for bed that night, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was 38 now, with lines around her eyes and silver threading through her dark hair. Her hands were rough from work, her body changed by 5 pregnancies and years of physical labor. But she was happy. Deeply, genuinely happy in a way she had never imagined possible during those desperate days in Philadelphia. Graham came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "About how far we've come. About how different my life is from what I thought it would be. Better or worse, so much better." She turned in his arms to face him. "I thought my life was over when Daniel died. I thought the best I could hope for was survival, keeping the children fed and housed. I never dreamed I could have this. Love, partnership, a real home. You took a tremendous risk coming out here. So did you, opening your door to a woman with 3 children when you were expecting someone else entirely." Graham smiled. "Best risk I ever took." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Come to bed, wife. Let's celebrate our anniversary properly." The years continued to pass, bringing changes both large and small. Samuel married at 21, bringing home a sweet girl named Anna from a neighboring ranch. They built a house on the far end of Graham's property and started their own family, with Samuel gradually taking over more of the ranch operations as Graham aged. Margaret married a teacher from Helena and moved to the capital, though she visited often. Thomas took over the carpentry business full-time, building a workshop near the main house and earning contracts across the region. Billy showed no interest in marrying young, too focused on learning everything he could about ranching from his father. Caroline, true to her childhood declaration, went east to medical school, one of the few women in her class. Graham and Juliet aged together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp. They celebrated their 20th anniversary, then their 25th. Grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with new laughter and energy. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other. Graham still brought Juliet wildflowers. Juliet still baked Graham's favorite foods. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains they had come to love. On the morning of their 30th anniversary, Juliet woke to find Graham already dressed, standing at the window of their bedroom. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About the day you arrived. 33 years ago now, you stepped off that stagecoach with 3 scared children and a trunk full of hope, and you changed my entire life. You changed mine too." Graham turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want you to know, Juliet, that every day with you has been a gift. Every single day. The good ones and the hard ones, the times we've laughed and the times we've cried. All of it. I wouldn't change a moment. Neither would I." Juliet's eyes filled with tears. "You gave me everything, Graham. A home, security, children, love. You gave me a life worth living. We gave each other that." He pulled her close and she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "We built something good here, something lasting." And it was lasting. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel and Billy's management. The family grew to include great-grandchildren. The name Sanders became synonymous with quality livestock and honest dealing throughout Montana. But more than that, the love that Graham and Juliet had built endured. It lived on in the stories their children told, in the values they passed down, in the way they treated each other and their own families. Years later, when both Graham and Juliet had passed peacefully in their sleep within weeks of each other, their children gathered at the ranch for the memorial. They stood together on the land their parents had built into a legacy, and they remembered. Samuel told the story of the day his mother arrived in Twin Falls with 3 children, frightened but determined. He told how Graham had looked at them and said, "Good, I've got room for all of you," and how those simple words had changed the course of all their lives. "They built something here," Samuel said, gesturing at the thriving ranch, the house full of memories, the land that had sustained them all. Not just a business, but a family, a home, a legacy of love and hard work and taking chances on each other. "They taught us that family isn't just about blood," Margaret added. "It's about choosing each other every day, about making room in your heart and your life for the people who need you." "They taught us to be brave," Thomas said, "to take risks when it matters, to believe in possibility." Billy smiled, remembering. "Dad used to say that the best thing he ever built wasn't this ranch or this house. It was the family we all became together. And Mom would say," Caroline finished, "that the bravest thing she ever did was get on that stagecoach to Montana. Not because she knew what she'd find, but because she had hope." The children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren stood together as the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The land stretched out before them, wild and beautiful and enduring, just as the love story that had started it all would endure in their hearts forever. In the family cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side. Graham Sanders and Juliet Harper Sanders, together in death as they had been in life. The inscription reads simply, "They made room for each other and built a love that lasted," and it did last. In the children they raised, in the land they stewarded, in the community they built, in the love they shared. It lasted in every sunset watched from that porch, every laugh shared around the dinner table, every moment of choosing each other over and over again. The story of the mail-order bride who showed up with 3 kids and the cowboy who said he had room for all of them became the foundation story of the Sanders family, told and retold across generations. It reminded them all that love often comes in unexpected packages, that families can be built as well as born, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of faith. Graham and Juliet's love story was one of courage and kindness, of taking chances and making commitments, of building something beautiful from the raw materials of hope and hard work. It was a testament to the power of opening your heart, of making room for others, of choosing love even when it's uncertain. And in the end, isn't that what all the best love stories are about? 2 people finding each other against the odds, building a life together one day at a time, and creating a legacy that outlasts them both. The Montana Territory may have been wild and harsh, but it was also a place where new beginnings were possible, where the past could be left behind, and where love could flourish if given room to grow. Graham and Juliet had given it that room. And their love had grown into something magnificent, something that touched everyone who knew them and lasted long after they were gone. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the American West, and it all began with a simple statement that changed everything. "Good, I've got room for all of you."